Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Rachel Biscocho, and I am the Vice President for the Notre Dame Club of New York City. Thank you for joining us tonight for the third event in our Beyond the Comfort Zone series. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Rachel Biscocho, and sorry about that, technical difficulties. Again, thank you for joining us tonight for the third event in our Beyond the Comfort Zone series. The series of events provides a platform for diverse voices from the Notre Dame community to engage in open, honest, uncomfortable, but meaningful and constructive dialogue. Let's learn from one another as we share our similarities, understand our differences, push our boundaries, challenge ourselves, and above all, agree to uphold a common respect for one another. Thank you to our club's Intercultural Diversity and Inclusion Committee, led by Rona Riodica and Edward Augustine, in partnership with our club chaplain, Father Eric Cruz, for organizing tonight's event. We'd also like to thank Christina Gonzalez and the Hispanic alumni of Notre Dame for partnering with us on this event as well. We started off the series answering the call of anti-racism and heard members of our own Notre Dame community share their stories about their encounters with racism and efforts towards racial equality at Notre Dame. We then proceeded to discuss with more members of our community on what would Notre Dame look like reimagined in our second panel. Our third panel in the series turns our attention to the lives of those seeking asylum at the US-Mexican border and the work of Catholic Charities and other organizations to address the many challenges faced by immigrants as they adjust to life in the state of New York and elsewhere in the United States. As Rona had put it so eloquently before, We Are ND stands for We Are Not Done, which is all of us, not just our students and alumni of color. There's a lot of work to do, and we are just getting started. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Juliette LaChapelle, who is a 1987 graduate of the Program of Liberal Studies at Notre Dame. After Notre Dame, she spent a year volunteering with the Holy Cross Associate Program before heading off to Harvard Law School. She describes her career as one long adventure, having worked as a trial attorney in New York, a federal prosecutor in Texas, and now as a mediator and very vocal mom in Colorado. So with that, Juliette, take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you to all the folks who are in the background on behalf of Notre Dame Club of New York, as well as the Hispanic alumni of Notre Dame. I want to thank all the panelists that are here with us today, because each of them has spent quite a bit of time with me so that I could get to know them and get to know the type of work that they are doing. And I'm just so grateful to Father Eric Cruz, to Christina Gonzalez, as well as Iris Outlaw for introducing us to you all. So I want to point out that we're a fairly diverse group. We are at the moment in 4 different places: El Paso, Texas, New York City and the surrounding area. I'm in Colorado, and we have a panelist from South Bend, Indiana. So with that, I'm going to allow you all to introduce yourselves one by one, and then we'll get into the substance of the topic. Marisa, let's start with you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marisa Limon Garza. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm a 1999 and 01 grad of Notre Dame, a proud product of the Alliance for Catholic Education, and I currently serve as the Deputy Director with the Hope Border Institute, a social justice nonprofit here in El Paso, Texas, bordering our sister city of Ciudad Juarez. And I also serve as the Student Recruitment Director with the Hispanic Alumni of Notre Dame. I'm thrilled to be here and excited to be part of this panel.
Thank you. Thank you. Mario, you're next.
Pleasure, and thank you, Juliette and Notre Dame for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here with you and all these panelists and my colleagues. My name is Mario Russell. I am a graduate of Haverford College and graduated from law school in 1993. I've been doing immigration since that time, more or less. Federal litigation, clerkships, worked in some law firms, but really have been working with Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of New York since about 2000. I teach at St. John's Law School as well. And now I'm the director of the Immigrant and Refugee Services for the Archdiocese. And we have a significant program here that obviously we'll be telling you about a little bit more in detail to come. So pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Next, we have Juan Pablo.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm the coordinator for the Day Lever program, and I'm really honored to be here with all of these accomplices in building in building a better world of fairness, peace, and love for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. And Fanny, you're next.
Hello, everyone. Really excited to be here with all of you. My name is Fanny Gomez. I am the social media specialist at Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of New York. I am an immigrant myself. I was born in the Dominican Republic. Both my parents are immigrants. Came here when I was about 2, and I have a very special place in my heart for this issue. But specifically for this panel, I took a trip down to the Northern Triangle. It'll be 2 years now. So I'll be sharing my story down there, what I found, what touched me, and I hope that it's enlightening for everyone.
It will be. It will be. And Rudy?
The famous words of 2020, you're on mute.
Exactly.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Rudy Monterosa. I'm originally hailing from sunny Southern California, but now reside in beautiful South Bend, Indiana. When I came here for law school back in 1998, I graduated in 2001, and I've been here ever since. I'm the son of immigrant parents. My father fled El Salvador when he was seeking asylum here in the United States back in the 60s. And then my mother came here to the United States from Mexico because my father was a migrant farm worker working in the fields of San Jose, and my mom wanted to pursue her American dream in the Norte, and so decided to come here to the US. So from that immigrant experience growing up, I wanted to be able to dedicate my life to helping others and being a voice for the voiceless. So now I work as a criminal and immigration attorney here in South Bend, Indiana, and I also teach future generations of immigration lawyers at the Notre Dame Law School. And I'm very excited to be here along with this very distinguished panel.
Thank you, Rudy. And thank you again to all of you for being here. I want to point out that in addition to our locations, we are very diverse in terms of our immigrant connections. I think through parenting or partnership or marriage, we represent the Dominican Republic, El Salvador, let's see here, Mexico, Guatemala, and Italy. So quite a diverse group. I want to get started with our subject matter by rooting us in the moment and just giving sort of a background of where we are. So today we have to acknowledge that we are hurting, that we are in the midst of a growing crisis. COVID-19 has taken the lives of at least 1.5 million people worldwide. We have lost 274,000 lives here in the US. It has also taken jobs and homes, and as a result, our food lines continue to grow. On top of this, we are contending with increasing climate disasters in the form of hurricanes and fires. The immigration and asylum process on the southern border was already in jeopardy pre-COVID-19. But now the pandemic has all but frozen the asylum process. ICE, the agency responsible for immigration enforcement, tells us that it is overwhelmed. It cites massive increases in the number of people illegally crossing the border. In its 2019 annual report, it states that the high volume of migration over the year had created a severe humanitarian and border security crisis that continues to cripple our immigration system. In the details of that report, we are told that in 2019, 851,000 immigrants were stopped trying to cross the border illegally. 473,000 of them were in families trying to cross the border together. 76,000 of them were unaccompanied minors. Recent reports tell us that 54,000 immigrants were stopped and recorded and expelled immediately this last September, suggesting that the numbers for this coming year will be similar. Some question whether the numbers have been inflated. all agree that there has been a huge surge in the numbers of families and unaccompanied minors attempting to cross. All also agree that the triple threat of the pandemic, our immigration crisis, and the current administration's policies restricting asylum have left most asylum seekers in limbo. Failed policies have separated children and parents, leaving large numbers of children in the US without their parents. Tens of thousands are now either in US detention centers or in Mexican shelters and camps along the border. Still others are waiting in cities across the country for their asylum cases to be heard. It is a full-blown crisis. And though I know we all have lots of opinions about how we got here, and I know we'll be discussing those, at the end of the day, there are two essential questions that we want to make sure that we cover. They're two compassionate questions. The first is, who is in need? And the second is, how can we help? So I know we need to cover a lot of ground tonight, and in order to get to those questions. So let's get started with Marisa down on the border. Can you tell us a little bit more about your organization and the situation there in El Paso on the border?
Absolutely. Thank you again for shaping and for giving us an important framework. And I absolutely love that we are in D, that we are not done. I think that's fabulous. And it's absolutely the truth about this country. The United States as well is clearly not done. And so we are trying to live up to our stated values. And we believe that here in the borderland, the river that divides the US and Mexico perhaps does more uniting them and the rest of Latin America and the rest of the world. And so it's a mirror that we see that it reflects back to us who we are. And so the way that the Hope Border Institute really tries to achieve our mission of building solidarity across borders is through a combination of advocacy, research from the heart of the borderland, and also some important work in the formation of faith leaders that are continuing the cause and the fight for social justice. We stand on the shoulders of giants, including the 4 religious women that were killed in El Salvador 40 years ago today, and we honor their memory and their legacy. It's important that we continue to remind ourselves of that. So at Hope, August 3rd of 2019 put a lot of our work into stark relief. That was a day of a murder of 23 Mexicans in a Walmart in the heart of our community, led to, in many ways, by dangerous racist rhetoric and xenophobia. And so we here in my community deeply know and understand what it's like to be a community that's targeted, that's othered. 80% of the community here in El Paso is Mexican or of Mexican descent. So we are a community of immigrants as it is, and we have welcomed migrants and asylum seekers various times through the course of our history as a borderland community. Our efforts are humanitarian in nature, but they also go far beyond to really thinking about systemic change. And so what justice needs to look like. So through a partnership with Bishop Mark Seitz, the Diocese of El Paso, we have the Border Refugee Assistance Fund, where we support migrants at varying stages of their migration story that are stuck in Juarez due to US policy that you described a little bit about. So these are 18 shelters. There's approximately 5,000 people that are stuck in our sister city of Ciudad Juarez. A fifth of those are in the shelters, and the rest are figuring out means to be able to provide shelter and figure out ways to make things work as they wait for their asylum claims to begin again. The courts have been closed for months, as has many things ground to a halt in light of the pandemic. And so it's important that we connect the dots there and continue to provide service directly to those people. And then we also look further, look beyond, and look towards the Northern Triangle, as Fanny will share her experience. And we're working with a broad-based coalition. It's important to note that a lot of the work on the border is not one group alone, nor will the reforms that are needed and the reimagining of immigration is not going to be one group alone. And so it's going to require lots of different people working together to imagine this beautiful world of justice and more just systems. And so we're working in partnership with grassroots organizations in Central America to really think about what are the root causes of migration, specifically from those communities. And we know that as much as immigration is a central issue, it's not in isolation.
Correct.
It's intersectional.
Mm-hmm.
It is a climate issue. It's a women's issue. It's a family issue. It's also a racial justice issue. So Hope is happy to be part of this conversation and to do some of that work together to provide that comprehensive immigration reform that we so desperately need.
Tell us a little bit about who you see in the shelters right now. What countries are they coming in from?
So in the shelters right now, we have a coordinator who specifically works directly with communities and shelters. And it's important to note that the majority of the shelters in Ciudad Juarez are religious oriented, and they came up out of need. There wasn't a lot of coordination prior. There was one main shelter, the Casa El Migrante, which is run by the Diocese of Juarez. And that casa is part of a large network of casas throughout Mexico that provide the needs of migrants, whether it be repatriated Mexicans or whether it be people on the move from other parts of the world. Now we're seeing large groups of Central American migrants that have made part of their journey and come to the southern border, as well as Cuban migrants. But it's not uncommon to have a group of Ugandan migrants, other people from the African continent. And so it's very much a global issue, and we're just happening to see this here in the southern border. And it's important to note that they're not just individuals, they're not just single adults as what we had usually seen historically, but these are families. These are people, parent and child, siblings, a whole host of people that are connected and really trying to seek asylum.
Can you talk a little bit about, when we talked, you talked about siblings coming together, and you've got one that's under 18 and one that's over 18, and what happens to those siblings in that situation?
Absolutely. So unfortunately, in my opinion, the US government has a very narrow definition of what a family unit is. And so it's a biological parent and a biological child, and that is a family unit. In my own Latinx culture, Mexican culture, Chicano culture, familia is a very broad term, and it extends far and wide. And that includes siblings, that includes cousins, that includes aunts, uncles, godparents, neighbors. And so it becomes difficult when people are on the move and they have to kind of create and have different permutations of that family unit come to the southern border, and then get hit with the reality that in the eyes of the US government and this administration in particular, if you are not that biological parent to child, you can and most likely will be separated. So that a parent, the adult in that scenario you described, may be required to remain in Mexico, whereas that young person, the underage person, the minor, may be kept apart or put into the different custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. It varies depending on case, but that idea of family and those bonds that we so recognize are not always held up in our actual practice in the US government.
Now, you talked quite a bit about the agencies that are responding to this crisis. What government agencies are involved, both on the Mexican side and on the US side?
So there's a whole host of agencies, whether in the United States from the Department of Homeland Security to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, all the different agencies within DHS. Here in El Paso, we are a militarized community. As much as we are just like any other suburb and any other city with big box stores and mom and pop stores, we also have border walls and fences and razor wire and drones and border patrol and ICE and things on things on things.
And like 2,000 National Guard members now.
We have had a whole host. I mean, if there's ever a question of national security and border security, we've seen it here in our community. And so it's not uncommon. And sadly, it's become a way of life that people have adapted to. Painfully, it's hard to tell fellow El Pasoans this is not what it's like in every community across the United States. As much as we are an all-American city and one of the safest cities in the country, we have a different reality here. And it's something that's unique along the southern border. And so then in Mexico, obviously a lot of the policies that this administration has put into place have not been done in isolation. We as a country have bullied our way into getting agreements with other countries to kind of help extend this vision of walling off asylum and immigration. So we have other governments that are doing that work. So agencies within the Mexican government, within the Central American governments that are specifically tied to these efforts. And so it's not just the United States alone. We've caused other folks and encouraged other people to help us support this hardening of our borders and sealing off any chance of people seeking asylum.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the folks who don't make it into shelters. Where are they?
So some people choose not to be in a shelter for a variety of reasons. A shelter is not always the best place. These are oftentimes places that were propped up out of need. And so initially, not knowing much about the migrant protection protocols, the Remain in Mexico program that kind of pushed everything that we were seeing here at the southern border further south and created this limbo, furthered by the Title of 42 and the use of the public code, that health code, that is making it pretty much not possible for people to even seek asylum right now. Those programs have made it incredibly difficult. And so people thought, with a lot of uncertainty, you know, how long will I be here? Will it be days? Will it be weeks? It will be months. And now we're past a year. And so, in an indefinite future, and there's no set date to end these programs. And so some people choose to not live in shelters, whether that's trying to figure out a way to rent a room. There are several Cuban migrants who've figured out ways to support one another. There's several businesses that have opened just in different responses. So it's changing the complexion of the city of Juarez. It's going under a shift regarding that. There's many people who just choose not to be in that space. And even within northern Mexico, there's lots of migration within the country, people just looking for a place to find shelter.
Right.
And so it's always changing. And so I can be in Juarez today, and then there could be another lived reality tonight. It just is always shifting.
Okay, shifting sands. And this is happening all the way along the border, which is nearly 2,000 miles long. And my understanding is there are about 8 different border ports that you can come through and you can enter. And that is where you are seeing a lot of the border crossings occurring just outside of those cities. Is that correct?
So historically, when a person goes to seek asylum, they're required to present themselves usually at a port of entry. And now what we've seen is the dangerous part is that people, because they're in this limbo, because they don't know when they're able to make a claim, because they're in such dire straits, people are targeted as migrants in Ciudad Juarez for violence. There are attacks, there are assaults, there are robberies, there's extortion, and there's rape. And so it's incredibly difficult. And people oftentimes end up kind of in a self-imposed house arrest in the shelters because it can be difficult. You know, Juarez is a community that has struggled has a long history of challenge, also of resiliency and thriving, but adding this other layer has just created more complexity. So some people are choosing to make their chances and take their shot and try to enter what's called without inspection, which means coming in without the US government knowing and trying to get there between a port of entry, which sometimes means scaling the wall, which sometimes means falling, which sometimes means going through the desert, which sometimes means going through very difficult conditions to just try to get that chance at reconnecting with family and getting out of the additional trauma of what it means to be forced to stay in Mexico.
Okay, thank you. Let's move a little bit into the New York area and get a sense of what's happening in the New York area. Mario, can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing as the Director of Immigration and Refugee Services, and who you were encountering in your community in need of help?
Sure. So thank you, and thank you, Marisa, for your really hard work and important work on the border, because really it is interconnected, you know, and what we see and experience in New York has every bit of a related, you know, connection to the experience on the border. I just want to say that, kind of in a, you know, sort of prefatory sense, how much I think, appreciating how much this is a difficult question. The question of immigration is a difficult question on the one hand. I can appreciate how much it involves questions of policy and identity and law. But I think what makes the work of those in this panel special, I think, is a deeper consciousness and a deeper respect and a deeper honoring of the idea that it is about individuals, and that the desire, and really the work of Catholic Charities, is the desire to honor the dignity of each person. And that when we enter into relationship with a person or persons, they no longer become an idea. And that, I think, brings us to a place of building a society that is both just and compassionate. And I experience these ideas as deeply related. And, from a personal perspective, it is really why I do this work. It is because of the individuals that I've gotten to know and whose lives are sometimes transformed and sometimes not transformed by law, sometimes changed and sometimes not changed by circumstance. But it is the walking with, it is the being with, and it is the striving towards a sense of justice that is deeper than legal justice and compassion that I think makes us, and I would sort of use the words of Thomas Merton, right, makes us as a society become our best self. And I think, to your point, Juliet, introducing us here is, I don't think we are in a state of best self as a society right now. And I don't mean it necessarily to critique every single American, but at least with respect to how we are doing immigration now, we are really struggling as a society to figure it out and to get it right. And I think we've taken a lot of steps backwards in the last, frankly, 4 years, but even more perhaps, and going back to 10, 15, 20 years in our conversation about migration and identity, and what does it mean to create an America and an American society that is its best self. At Catholic Charities in New York, we're very busy, and in a sense, we are also a border town, right? I mean, we are next to two important airports. We're close to the northern border, and truth be told, is a lot of the folks who seek refuge and come from either the Northern Triangle or the South American states that are in crisis make their way to New York in one way or another, because New York is still, in a sense, very vibrant and very important in building communities that are communities of color and communities of immigrants. We have a very large program. We run about 6 or 7 different kind of areas of really integration work with immigrants. We have, legal services, about 60 lawyers that are in court, in every single court you can imagine, whether it's federal, family, state, right? Immigration, of course, defending, moving forward cases for asylum. We have an ESL program. We have a hotline program where we run 3 hotlines that answer about 90,000 calls a year. We work with our day labor programs that Juan Pablo will tell you a little bit about. Is extremely important in sort of in dealing and healing with an intractable American crisis of the undocumented. And we resettle refugees. And then also we work with unaccompanied minors. And I sort of touch on that piece here because I think it's extremely relevant to what Marisa was talking about. We've worked with about 5,000 or 6,000 unaccompanied minors each year. And what we're talking about really are children who flee from the Northern Triangle states of, right, Honduras, El Salvador, and frankly, adding Nicaragua and Guatemala, seeking safe haven. And to me, this is really no different from the Syrian exodus that we would read about in 2013, 2014, and 2015. It is no different. These are human beings seeking safety, protection. And in their case, they're also seeking to reunify with their mom, their dad, or an extended family, who's in New York or Chicago or LA. Right. It's been called a crisis, but in fact, it is the movement of human beings who are seeking safety and security. And in the last, year and year and a half, obviously, we've seen an incredibly powerful and painful decline in the arrival of these children because they're being turned away for various reasons given, but many of them, frankly, illegal. In other words, violating the law, despite, Title 42 COVID protections.
The expulsions.
Turning these kids away who are seeking asylum. And their claims and cases are very, very straightforward. So that's the work we do generally. Yeah.
Where where do you place unaccompanied minors? Are they placed with families in shelters? How does that?
Sure. So the way that the system works is that after they kind of are sort of screened at the border within 72 hours, if they are in fact sort of deemed to kind of move to the next step, they're placed in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and in any one of a 24 shelters throughout the United States. There's about 9 of them in the northern suburbs of New York. So, for instance, we visit and do know your rights presentations and consultations with these kids who are in 9 shelters throughout the New York region. And then they spend about 3 weeks to a month and a half there as they determine the suitability of their placement with the mom or dad or sister or uncle who might be in Virginia, might be in Miami, might be in Seattle, and eventually they're transferred there. About 84% of kids or so are reunited with a family member. The balance of those kids often are in long-term foster care, and eventually many will what's called age out. So the crisis there, in a sense, for these kids is when they turn 18, really on their 17th year and 364th day, ICE will come to the shelter, put them in handcuffs, and take them to an adult facility, where they then have to fight for protection against deportation in that setting, unless we, let's say, intervene and are able to have them released to a shelter or some other kind of situation.
When you say intervene and they're released to a shelter, you have a network of shelters that accommodates unaccompanied minors and those that age out.
I wish I could use the word network as generously as I feel that you intended to mean. There isn't a network. There's a handful, even in New York City, maybe 3, maybe 4, and they're full, right? So even there, kind of, there's never the assumption or the guarantee that you can make that placement happen. So it's not uncommon that the kid ends up in an adult detention center in New Jersey, typically, awaiting deportation. In that case, we build a legal defense. Maybe we go to federal court if we have to. COVID has also altered that formula significantly in terms of warranting release for kids who are particularly vulnerable to COVID in these shelters, in these detention facilities. They tend to be jails, right? They're not prisons. They're county jails in various parts of New Jersey.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a good segue to Juan Pablo and the work that he's doing. Juan Pablo, my understanding is you're in charge of the day laborer program, and as a result, you are on a daily basis out in the community, actually talking with immigrants and hearing their stories. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work?
Yeah, thank you, Juliet. Yes, like you were saying, it used to be before coronavirus, it would be 150 handshakes a day. Now it's elbow bumps, between 100 and 150 a day with all kinds of people from this city. This is a real city with a real metropolis, international metropolis, and so we see people from all parts of the world. But mostly I work in my day labor program with people that are coming from Ecuador, Mexico, and the majority right now, the people that have been coming for the past 2 years probably are from Central America. Okay. We meet with them every day and talk about their lives and what they're doing and how can we help. Sometimes, most of the time, it's just like Mario was saying, is just recognizing that dignity that they have as human beings. Because the truth is, the matter is that what they come here for is seeking for work. They're not asking for anything else. Even so, sometimes we have to offer things, and we offer a lot of different services. All they want is work. And I saw it right now during the coronavirus, for example. During the coronavirus, the first 3-4 weeks of the pause New York, they weren't going to the pantries. They were just asking for work. Can you get me some work? Do you know someone that's working? Do you know if construction is going to open? Nobody was asking for anything else. So that's what basically what we do is we are the liaison between all the services that New York City has as a city, New York State has as a state, and definitely, of course, with all the services that Catholic Charities provides as an agency. We are the liaison for those people that have been here for a while and want to learn more of how can they grow in this city. And with all the people that are just coming right now to open, trying to live their lives and survive, right? Survive.
Where are the folks that you're encountering on a daily basis? Where are they staying? Are they in shelters?
Some of them are in shelters. Yeah, so there's the different hierarchies and degrees. I say, I go every day to see them on the streets. And what does that mean? That means all those corners where you see men and women looking for jobs. That means parking lots of Home Depots. That means gas stations. And that's where I meet with them. And then within the structure, people will always organize everywhere in the world, right? And then there's no difference with this group of immigrants. They will organize and they have their hierarchies. The people that had just come, they stand on the outsides of the parking lot. The people that have been here longer, they're in the middle of the parking lot. And the people that already have cars and have become contractors and are subcontractors, those are all the way on the doors of the Home Depot with their cars and their vans, with their tools.
Ready to work.
Ready to work, all of them ready to work.
Now, you mentioned when we were talking that you don't oftentimes see women showing up for that kind of work. Where are the women and how are they getting work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to go back to the shelter question that you made before, but since you talked about this is very important to say. Women are harder than men, like we know, in the whole world, right? But in situations of risk like this, they have it harder because of cultural and social structures in constructions. They have to build their own network to find jobs. It's not everywhere that they can go out on the streets to look for a job, because culturally, it's not well seen for women to be out on the streets, right? Or be in the corners. But they have built, because people will organize, and they will always, the people are resilient and they will organize. And they find their ways to establish parks and special places. Usually that's one of the benefits of having worker centers. And New York City is one of the places that has worker centers in the 5 boroughs. We have one of those two worker centers working right now in the Bronx. And we are part of a coalition working through all the boroughs. Going to worker centers, certain parks where people already know that they can go and get someone to do housekeeping, construction, home attending. And this is for women. Yes. Yeah, because men will stand in any corner and stand in any Home Depot. And yeah, that's another thing that we've seen in the past 2 years. There's a lot of women changing from the traditional jobs that women used to have, and they're coming into construction. In one of our trainings last year, before coronavirus, there was one training where we had 80% of the people trying to get a license, an OSHA license, site safety training for construction, were women. And it was a beautiful experience to have all kinds of how can I say this? To have people there of all ages and all genders, have them all there at the same time, because that's another thing that we're seeing now. Since we mentioned women and we mentioned man, the LGBTQ communities are opening a lot more now too, and they're participating in our trainings. So it was beautiful to see a training when we would have babies in the middle of the training, right? Some moms carrying their own babies. At one point, it started to get crazy because we had like 13 children there with volunteers taking care of them, and we started including some people to cook, and it was a very very most of our work is very frustrating. So this experience is one of those times when you feel rewarded about what you're doing.
Yes.
We are facing with a lot of hardship, so it's good to see that, like I tell you, people are resilient. Yeah.
Tell me, Juan Pablo and Mario, you mentioned this as well, that the folks who are working for you have an incredible amount of fatigue. You know, that the hardships that they're seeing throughout the pandemic have just become so extreme. How are you all and your workers? What is bringing you back? How do you lift yourself back up again?
I'm happy to start, Juan Pablo, unless you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, you can go, Mario,
Yeah.
and I can tell a couple of stories.
So a couple of things, it's interesting. One thing that have noticed is obviously with the potential shift in administration and the sense that there might be a little more grace returned to policies. There's really been an uplift in the mood in the office. What's been interesting too, and I was talking to somebody about this the other day who said, some of the young attorneys, and we have, as I said, we have about 6 or 7 attorneys, some of the young attorneys who just graduated, let's say in the last 3 or 4 years, I think what they struggle with is not knowing and not having a sense that there is also a way of being in the immigration world that is hope-filled. So those of us who are sort of been around longer, I've been around since 1850, we know, and we've had the experience of working on cases and in courts and in engaging on the hope side of the law and the hope side of transformation. And so I think many of us can attach to that and know that history is perhaps in some ways cyclical, but has an arc. One of the things, though, that I want to share and that I tell my students all the time, and I tell them not to tell any of their other teachers at the law school, is that, in my opinion, they should not maintain professional boundaries. And by that, I don't mean to say that they should do anything that's indiscreet or illegal with any of their clients, but that they should get to know them. Because I think that when we know our clients just through their pain and their suffering, just through the hardship, just through the challenge, just through the hurt, just through the trauma, and we don't in fact receive them as people who can laugh, right? As people who can smile, as people who have love in their lives, as people who can dream, and we don't get to know that side of them, then I think we burn out. So I encourage my students, I encourage all of my staff, in a sense, to make the time to get to know your clients, get to know them better. Maybe one of those interviews that you do out of 5 or 6 is actually spent, if you can, with a little bit of downtime.
Some love.
Because I really think it makes a big, big difference in that sense of the burnout that you mentioned.
Okay. And
yeah, I think it's the people. Yeah, it's the people who replenish our energy.
You told me a story about a man that you had come across who was very giving when he had nothing himself. Can you go ahead and relay that story? I thought it was so moving.
Oh yeah, that was an incredible moment. Since we're receiving people from Central America, one of a friend of mine here that works here in NYU, he knows that I'm from Guatemala. He's from Guatemala too. We know each other from the Guatemalan community. Through his church, they were working with trying to help people that were just asylum seekers, specifically from Guatemala. So he had this person that was just coming in through the border with, that in Guatemala we have 23 different languages. We have an is an incredibly diverse country. So this person that was coming barely spoke Spanish, spoke nothing of English, and only spoke his native language, right? Which one of the Mayan languages.
Mhm.
And he said, well, you know what? I have, so this friend of mine from NYU said, I have this person that just came through the border. He's an asylum seeker. We've, from our church, we paid for his lawyer fees. We paid for his ticket. We got him here to New York. We have him settled down in a house, but he's always worked in construction back home. He wasn't working construction here. So I remember that you can help us with training him so he can get his license. I said, yeah, of course. I'll go pick him up. I'll take him to the training. I went to pick him up to the house, took him to the training. I said, well, you know what? Part of my contribution is going to be, I'm going to pick him up. I'm going to buy him some snacks at the coffee break. I'm going to give him lunch, and then I'm going to drive him back, right? And so you don't have to worry about that. He doesn't have to worry about that. But when lunchtime came, he came to look for me because we had already kind of like within signs and a little language had agreed that we were gonna do this lunch thing together. But at the lunchtime, also during the trainings, at the lunchtime is when all of the men come to tell me about their problems and their issues and the things that they need help with, or sometimes to volunteer or to say they have jobs or something for other people. So I was kind of busy, and I signaled to him to wait for me for 5 minutes. So he sat down like about maybe 10 feet from me. And so there were men going all around, everybody having lunch, and some of the people talking to me. And then I saw this other worker from Dominican Republic who had one styrofoam box in his hands, like a lunch box, right? Like he just bought it at the deli. And he was walking down there and he saw the guy was just sitting there, right? While everybody was having lunch. So he approached him and asked him, do you have any food? And my friend, my Guatemalan friend, didn't understand, right? He just, so he said, so he gave him the box. I said, you can have it. You can have it. I'm already full. It's okay. You can have it. I'm full. So this, of course, warmed my heart. And I thought, oh my God, this guy's so generous, right? Giving him his lunch. Because then I saw that the guy went just to sit down with his friends. He didn't go to buy another lunch. He just sat there, right? But that wasn't the most striking part. Because the most striking part was the next Wednesday. Because we have our trainings on the weekend. And that's when this happened. The first Wednesday after that, we have the pantry over there in Catholic Charities. And when I drove into work at the office, there was the pantry line. And this person who had given his lunch was standing on the pantry line. And I asked him, what are you doing here? And he said, well, you know what? I'm really sorry. I have to get food somehow because I haven't worked for 3 weeks. And I haven't eaten since Friday.
He was down to his last dollars.
He hadn't eaten since Friday. On Saturday, he gave his lunch away. I don't know how he got that lunch, but he gave it away to someone else that didn't have something to eat.
So that's part of the inspiration that keeps you going then.
Yeah. There is nothing that we do in our work that can repay that back to humanity. And I'm so glad that everybody in my team knows that for a fact. There is nothing that we do at work that can repay that debt of those things to humanity, the things they do. And that absolutely replenishes you. And you understand that everything is relative. And that people, when all human beings, when we're in a tight situation, we understand what's important. And we understand about solidarity.
Connection is what's important. So
the people.
Speaking of your team, let's switch over to Fanny. Fanny, you are the director of social media for Catholic Charities.
Yes, the social media specialist.
The social media specialist. And
Mhm.
you talked about at the beginning how you went on a fact-finding mission for Catholic Charities down to the Northern Triangle. Tell us where you went and what you saw.
Sure. So we took the trip April of last year. It was myself, the Director of Government Relations, Luz Tavares, also at Catholic Charities, Monsignor Kevin Sullivan, who's our Executive Director. And then he also had with him Stuart Applebaum, who's the president of a union organization here in New York, and the comptroller of New York, Tom DiNapoli. So we all went down there. Basically, it was literally just a fact-finding mission. We wanted to know why so many people from these three countries were coming up to the border. I mean, among other immigrants, but for whatever reason, at that time, we were seeing an influx of these immigrants. So
what year are we in, Fanny?
that was last year, 2019 in April.
Okay.
So we went for a week. We visited these three countries in a week. It was about a 1.5 day each country. So it was very, very quick, exhausting physically and emotionally because of everything that we saw. But it was a very rewarding trip, very rewarding journey. We got to meet so many different people. It was organized by Catholic Relief Services in each country. So they had us meet with the cardinals of each diocese that we went to. We had youth organizations who we met with, immigration organizations down there. We went to a farm and spoke to local farmers and how they are struggling with agriculture and had to kind of remake what they know. They had to kind of reinvent the wheel of how they saw farming because of the drought. So it was just hour after hour after hour of interviews and listening to stories. And
share some of those with us.
I'm sorry?
Share one of those with us. What kind of stories were you hearing?
Yeah, so a lot of it, so my purpose to go down there was to kind of figure out, because the rhetoric here was that, you know, that people were coming here to steal our jobs and that they should just stay in their country. Like, why are you coming here? That was the rhetoric. So I wanted to go down there to kind of identify what their purpose was for coming up here. And the three main issues were extortion, violence through extortion from gang members, and I'll get into that. Poverty was another one, lack of jobs and opportunity, and then also weak infrastructure, corruption in government, which was the third kind of basis of why people were leaving. But these things were, you kind of know these things already. You know, it's not like, I don't think that we can talk to any American and they wouldn't know something like this. But what I found out was that there are layers after layers after layers after layers of these three topics, and they're connected. So they're intertwined, so meticulous, and so it's so complicated. So for example, the gangs are a big thing, very, very bad. So one of the biggest gangs in El Salvador, but you know, in all three countries, even here, was the MS-13 gang. They started by the youth of Salvadorians in LA. So it started here in LA, I believe in the 60s, and it just caught fire. So what happens is when one of the stories was, we met with she was a grandmother. We met with her specifically because she was part of an immigration organization, but her personal story really touched me. So he was crossing the border and she lost her son. At that point, it had been about 3 years since she lost her son and hadn't heard from him. And she told us that she lived in one town. That town was controlled by a specific gang. Her daughter and her grandson lived in another town, and that town was controlled by a rivalry gang. So her daughter had her grandson. She got pregnant, had her grandson, and she hadn't been able to visit them. It had been 8 months since she saw them because she can't cross over to the next town. Because if a gang member from the rivalry town saw her, they would think that she was being an informant, a spy, whatever, and either retaliate or, you know, things like that. So it's such a, there's so many levels to this that I wouldn't even have thought that it would affect people in this way. Another thing is that many of those people who live in houses, they don't have deeds to their homes. So a gang member can come to your house and slip you a note or knock on the door and say, we're giving you 24 hours to leave your house. We want your house. And we're giving you 24 hours to leave or you die. So at that point, especially if you have a family with kids, you wouldn't think twice. And you would say, okay, I'm leaving.
Right.
What we found was that people don't automatically go into the United States or think, well, let me cross. They say, well, I have a family member in this place, let me go there. And we found out that people move within their own country 4 times before even thinking about going to the border. So
Things have just become that desperate.
Right. It's literally their last choice. And
talked about when we spoke, you talked about having to stop at these barricades that were gang controlled in order to get access into certain areas.
Yeah.
And I was looking up just the statistics on gang violence and murder rates, and El Salvador ranks as number 1 in the world in terms of homicide rates. So a very dangerous place for a lot of people if you somehow end up on the wrong side of one of the gangs.
Yeah, and they know you because they collect tax on you. So another thing that they do for control, it's called impuesto de guerra, which is a tax, translated as a tax on war, but it's more or less a tax for protection or a tax for your life. So each house or, each family is to give the gang an amount, let's say monthly or weekly. So they owe them rent, more or less.
Right.
And the gangs make, I think it was, at that point, it was like $300 million in just 2018 alone, just by collecting rent in the country. So
it's hard for anybody who's already below the poverty line.
Yes. And if you don't pay up, then guess what? You need to go because then you're probably gonna die.
Right.
So the whole thing with the barricades in the towns is just another form of control. They need to know who's coming in and out. And if they don't know your face, if you don't live in that neighborhood, then what are you doing in that neighborhood? So for example, if I go to visit someone in a neighborhood that's controlled by an MS-13 gang group, then I would have to be announced or I'm not getting through. And if they say it's okay for me to visit, then it's okay. But if not, then barricades are locked. They're the ones that open it.
Right.
So it's funny because I was reading through my report before coming onto this panel. And one of the things that I remembered that we wrote was that these gangs, so what happens is that you get to this desperate point in your life, right? That either you're going to starve or your kids are going to starve or you're going to die because of extortion or violence, etc. And when we were down in El Salvador, we met with a gentleman, basically the same thing. So he heads up an immigration organization down there. And he said that the model the motto that the youth have down in El Salvador. I'll say it in Spanish, then I'll translate it. I don't remember it by heart, so I had to write it down. So the motto down there is, si me van a matar aquí en El Salvador, mejor que me maten tratando de llegar a los Estados Unidos, which translates to, if they're going to kill me in El Salvador, I'd rather be killed trying to get to the US. So that's their mindset. And I think that it's not just the youth.
That's very telling. Yes.
Spoken. So that is literally their mindset, that they don't want to die, they want to survive.
And so they come to the US and either they try to cross without permission, or they file for asylum. And we know from the, all of the news reports that essentially the asylum process is frozen at the moment. But not only that the asylum numbers, there's a ceiling of, I think it's 30,000 it was last year. And this year it was down at, I think, maybe between 12 and 13,000. And maybe 800 of those were from Latin America, is what I'm recalling. So the difficulties is just one thing on top of another in terms of trying to find a way to live and to work.
Right.
So we're now about 5:30. So I want to move and switch gears a little bit to you, Rudy, and talk about what is happening at Notre Dame, what your experience has been there in terms of Latin studies and the work that you all are doing to help out on the border and in the South Bend community.
Thank you, Juliet. I'm off mute. I remember. Well, one thing I wanted to make sure that folks realize that are listening out there in the world of the internet was that really what we were talking about throughout the course of the last hour is the difference of the experience here in the United States. And I look back to my parents, and when I mentioned my father who came from El Salvador back in the 60s to seek asylum, he was leaving his country not because he wanted to. He was leaving his country because he was seeking protection here in the US. On the other hand, my mother, the reason she came here, and actually I look back to my grandfather who worked the fields in San Jose, he didn't even want to stay in the United States. He actually passed away in Mexico. He came here to work the fields and would go back home, and then would come back and work the fields and come back home. But my mother would hear the stories about how there's opportunity in the United States, and she decided that she wanted to come here because she wanted a better way of life. So within my own experience, we're talking about a migrant worker, and then we're talking about an asylee, and we're talking about an immigrant.
Right.
And so I think over the course of, exactly. And I think over the course of the last 4 years or so, Notre Dame hosted a conference with the Center for Migration Studies about a month ago. And we were hearing that this is a global phenomenon where we're starting to mix this conversation, or the rhetoric, like we heard Fanny mention before, the rhetoric about immigrants and asylees, and we're starting to mix the two. And we're saying that everybody that's coming into the United States is coming here because they want to stay here, or they're coming here because they want to be able to work or what have you. And that's not the case. There's some folks, well, we're hearing the stories today, there's some folks that are coming here because they have no other choice. Because we said on the Statue of Liberty, give me your downtrodden, give me your poor, give me those that are seeking refuge, and we'll give you that refuge. And on the other hand, the other conversation that we need to have is how are we going to be able to provide due process to 11 million undocumented immigrants that are already here in the United States, like Juan Pablo was talking about, people that have already been here for years. And what are we going to do about being able to make sure that these people have an opportunity to come out of the shadows and be able to provide work? Juliet, you talked about COVID-19. And during the span of COVID-19, the essential workers, the people that we saw there on the front line, were the undocumented, were people that had DACA, were people that, despite the fact that they may not have legal status, we're still making our economy still run, and even providing healthcare. So what we're doing down at Notre Dame, what I would say is that the work that I do is threefold. First, my career with my wife and the lawyers that work in my law firm is that we represent individuals on both sides of the table, right? Those who seek to legalize their status and those who are seeking protection they're fleeing for whatever reason from their country. The other big thing that they taught me at Notre Dame is that I'm part of it, that we're a part of a community, right? And I'm sure that we hear with Catholic Charities, I love what Mario was saying, that we need to humanize people, that we need to help out our fellow man, our fellow brother, our fellow sister, our fellow human being. And so to that regard, we volunteer and we encourage our students at Notre Dame to volunteer. And, you know, at Notre Dame, at the law school, we like to say that we're educating a different kind of lawyer. And when we say that to the extent that, you know, we're helping individuals, not because it's our job, but we're doing it because it's our vocation, because we want to help our fellow individuals. So, you know, just sitting on this panel, and I look back and I think about, you know, one of the beauties of once you get older, you get to look back and see how things played out in life. And I look at Marisa, and I remember that both of us were at Notre Dame back in 98, 99 was my first year in South Bend, Indiana, when in September I was freezing, and I thought, what am I doing here? But at that point, we're both children of immigrant parents, and now you see the dreams of our parents realized, because now we're able to provide and we're contributing to our society, and we're contributing members of this country. We're not depleting resources. We're not failing to pay taxes. And so I see that the work that all of us here on this panel are doing is that we're seeking to be able to provide that dream, not only just for people that come here, but really for the sake of our country. And I think that's the conversation that needs to be had when we start talking about immigration and asylum.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a great segue to our next section, which is, what are you hopeful about the next administration? And what would you have them do in those first days of the administration in terms of helping out with the immigration issues that we're facing? Who would like to start? It's an open question.
I'm happy to contribute.
All right, Marisa.
So this is work that a ton of immigration orgs across the country are doing and thinking and pushing and advocating for right now. And so we see this as a hopeful moment. It's a discipline, as wise folks have said, practicing hope every day and finding it in our work. And I think that we can do that right now. And in the first 100 days, we want this administration to do what it said it's going to do already, what it committed to do. And so we want to hold them accountable for that. And then we also really want to take the opportunity that the pandemic has posed to all of us, which is to really reimagine what a quote normal existence outside of a pandemic would look like, and use that as an opportunity to really reimagine what it would be like to have a radically different immigration system that is based on human dignity, has been mentioned so many times, that understands that there are drivers of migration that are around the globe that are causing people to flee, that one size doesn't fit all, and that we have to be able to pivot and adjust to new challenges and new trends, and to really understand that the borderland, the community that I call home, is not okay for it to be a pawn in any kind of political game. And we will not exchange, a pathway for citizenship to one group in exchange for more border security and more border wall where we live. And so we commit to that. We offer our service to be part of creating that vision, co-creating and imagining that new future, and staying together as people of faith to help make that happen. And we know that we have Pope Francis's wisdom and vision to guide us and support. And we know that we can do this work together.
Right. And gave that mass on the border. What about those first days? What do you see as a pressing need, Marisa?
I mean, first and foremost, we know that the COVID pandemic is something that has to be addressed regardless, and it cuts across all areas. And so we know that the Title 42 and the use of the public health code to close the border has been incredibly difficult. And in some ways, that has to be a first step in order to end the programs like the Remain in Mexico program. So there absolutely should be a 100-day moratorium on deportations. There should be the overhaul of all of these programs and policies that have been put in place. And so that's what we're looking for. And in all reality, we're actually looking beyond those 100 days. We know that those days are important, but we've been in this work of justice for the long haul, and we will continue to go beyond that. And so some of that work will continue.
And of course, the reality is we have over 400 executive orders from the last administration relating to immigration, and how to undo all of that and unravel all of that is, of course, going to take a lot of work. Mario, I can see you'd like to add in something.
Well, I just wanted to sort of echo Lisa's point. I think at the, sort of what you say you do in the first 100 days and then what you envision in the next 100 years are often related and different at the same time. But I think there's a lot of bandaging that needs to be done. At its root, I think that the first thing that the administration should do is reactivate the mission statement of Department of Homeland Security to be an agency that is in fact about welcoming and integrating immigrants. That statement was actually rewritten in the last 4 years to basically say that it was about protecting America's borders, and that's
Right.
it. So I think that there's a cultural shift that needs to be already projecting outward other values. Rudy has said, and absolutely it's true, we have 10 million people who are in a chronic state of existential limbo.
Right.
And that now includes potentially 700,000 DACA recipients, maybe 400,000 recipients of temporary protected status. These numbers are growing under this administration. And I think that what this new administration needs to do, not only shutting off sort of the fire hose of and turning back, in a sense, so many of the due process and asylum restrictions that have been created, but, telling its Department of Justice to stop opposing or stop litigating. I mean, they're very practical steps that it can take to kind of stop this onslaught and stop the prosecutions or defending against so many litigations, including, for instance, the public charge litigation of which we were a part as a Catholic Charities. Drop the suit, right? Just let's go back to where the public charge rules and regulations were before, which didn't essentially intentionally target poor people and brown people. So there's some easy steps that can be done, politically controversial, of course. This administration, I think, has talked about, sort of returning DACA, to kind of its non-rescinded status, to bringing TPS back, to stop, the construction of the wall or potentially defunding some of those contracts, and obviously restoring the admission of refugees from what has been a historic low of now 15,000 to what the numbers typically have been from year to year, which is about between 80 and 100,000 admissions.
I think just in 2017, we're at 110,000 for the ceiling.
Right, and that again was sort of a holdover from prior administrations.
Right.
The way I visualize, in a sense, kind of where this administration can move is sort of thinking about external immigration issues, border issues, and then interior enforcement. And the last thing I would say simply, it can also return reason and balance to its enforcement priorities internally. It doesn't have to arrest and deport every single person it meets who's undocumented, because that really just flies in the face of humanity and of what it means for so many people that Juan Pablo and Rudy and Marisa work with, and we all work with, who've been here for 10, 15, 20 years. We've exploited their labor. We've benefited from their contributions, and yet we would deny them a sense that they're in fact citizens of our communities, and they are. So we shouldn't just willy-nilly deport them, but that has been happening, and that can also be stopped in its tracks.
Right. I mean, for years, the policy was, unless you had committed a crime and you were here working,
Right.
that there were no issues. And then, of course, we had to, once we entered this administration, worry about creating sanctuary cities. And the truth of the matter is, if you were in a state that was democratically run, then you had protection. But if you were in a Republican state, much less protection. So I I want to entertain some questions. Is there somebody else who wanted to comment? Rudy, did you want to say something?
I did, Juliet, but I also wanted to make sure that people are aware that even under the Obama administration, things weren't perfect, right? We were still battling these issues with regard to immigration and trying to get a just day for our clients. But what I wanted to comment though, which is really interesting to me, is what you just said right now about the sanctuary cities. You know, when we're talking about sanctuary, this movement of sanctuary, this wasn't something that just happened under the Trump administration. This was actually something that occurred back in the 80s. And I wanted to tie it back to what Fanny was sharing.
Yes, please.
So it was back during the 70s and the 80s when we had many Salvadorans that were coming to the United States. And the reason they were coming is because the United States was involved with the military over in El Salvador, where the United States government had denied it, that they were involved with what was happening down there, such that that was the reason why they were denying the applications of the Salvadoran asylees. And so they came to the United States seeking this asylum, and there was a sanctuary movement during that period of time. Their children that were ostracized because they were refugees were those individuals that then got involved and set up their own gangs, which was MS-13, because they were being ostracized from the general community. We then deported those individuals to El Salvador. And when they ended up in El Salvador, began what was MS-13, because again, of how we were involved in countries other than our own. And so it's interesting to me that what we're seeing with regard to immigration, it's cyclical, right? That what we're seeing happening now has happened before, and we just can't seem to get it right. But I believe what you had mentioned and what Mario had mentioned as far as these priorities, you know, under the Trump administration, I believe it was either the first or the second day, he issued an executive order. That executive order said that if you had been convicted of any crime, that you would be the target of deportation. If you had possibly committed a crime, you'd be the target of immigration. And if an officer thought that you were a danger, that you would be the target for removal for the United States. And so in essence, that became that there was no priority for anybody. Whereas at least under the Obama administration, they said, okay, we're gonna be targeting people that are convicted of felonies. And if somebody has been in the United States for a long period of time, we're not going to be focusing on those individuals because we don't have the resources to remove everybody from the United States. So I think that we need to bring some common sense, exactly what Mario had said before, and know that there's different agencies that have different roles. USCIS is an agency to provide benefits. ICE serves the role of enforcement. And sometimes the two would be convoluted, would be mixed under this administration, and we'd like to be able to see that change as we start the new administration.
Thank you. Juan Pablo?
Yeah, just to piggyback a little bit on what Mario and Rudy were saying right now. Yeah, I think the hope and the demand are the same. It's we need to work together with the administration and not against the administration. And so that's the hope and that's the demand that we have for the first 100 years. 100 days and probably 100 years.
100 years, right?
For the first 100 days, right? We need to work together and not against the administration. So that's the hope and the demand. And piggybacking also on what Rudy was saying, it's not about giving anybody a guilt trip or forcing anybody, manipulating anybody into agreeing with the ideas that most of us have. But it is true that the things that the migration that's happening right now is not something that we didn't know was going to happen. It's been studied by scholars since the 60s, 70s, 80s, that there was going to be a large migration in the 2000s because of the political international political postures of the United States, the external politics of the United States towards all our countries.
So you
my
should,
dad used,
to be able to see what's coming based on the actions that we've taken in the last 10 years.
In 1981, in 1981, in the worst of the dictatorships and the killings in Guatemala, and the worst of my dad came here to the United States Senate through the University of Washington. He was there doing his PhD. He came to talk to people in Congress, telling them that they had made a study that was, he predicted all that's happening right now. It was easy to see. It was easy to read in history that it was bound to happen. Yeah, destroying the economies and the history of our countries is making us come now. And like Fanny was saying, there's so many layers to this, right? And everything's related in such complicated ways. The gangs and the corruption and the fight against drugs and the fight against communism, and it's all tied. And in the end, it's having the ill effects that everybody's suffering.
Right. So I'm going to have to leave it with you, Juan Pablo, on this subject. We're now at the point where we should be entertaining some of our questions. I think we're only going to have time for a couple. In fact, we may only have time for one. And this relates to the piece of how do we help? So this is a great series. What can attendees of today's session do to help move things forward? What policy advocacy organizations and nonprofits are pushing for change that we can follow and donate to? So if you could each maybe take a minute to answer that question, that would be great.
I'll start just so I don't.
Okay, thank you, Rudy.
Sure. I would encourage people to walk the path, right? To educate themselves. So I really like what I heard from Fanny and the work that Marisa is doing down at the border, to actually be involved with programs and actually see what's happening with your own eyes. You know, Notre Dame has the Center for Social Concerns, they had a border immersion project where you actually went to the border and went through every stage that a migrant went through. Seeing it with your own eyes is a lot different than just reading about it in the news. So I would just encourage people to educate themselves. I'm a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and so I would highly recommend making sure that you educate yourself and that you know that it's from a trusted resource. And so I tout the American Immigration Lawyers Association as well as the American Bar Association.
Okay, Marisa.
Thank you. Yes, so the Hope Border Institute is a great place to get information, to find support. hopeborder.org is our website. We publish a weekly dispatch on Mondays. That is our roundup of the latest information of things that are happening here in the borderlands and how it can impact people. We also always like to remind people that the border is not just, and the issues are not relegated to the border, that immigration is something all across our country, and there are ICE detention centers probably in your own backyard or not that far. There are immigration courts not that far away from you either. And so we encourage people to engage locally. As Rudy was saying, yes, absolutely education. This is a Herculean topic. It's amazing that this panel has been able to consolidate and share so much in so little time. So it can very easily begin to feel overwhelming. We invite you to take small bites, start with your own community and what's in your parish. A lot of folks, have Peace and Justice Ministries. They have a Catholic Charity. They have Migrant Refugee Services. There are different components that are available. It's a great place to begin and to really think about what's going on. As far as advocacy, sometimes the best person to help support these efforts is your own voice and or your pastor. And so encouraging your pastor, could we have a group that specifically studies this issue from the lens of our faith? Can we write an op-ed together so that people understand and know where we stand as a people of faith? Can we have some kind of encounter experience and connect with people? Can we do some kind of accompaniment with people that are in our own backyard? And so there's many ways to get started. We're happy to be part of that process. And there's so many champions who can help you do the work to really be the agent of change that we're going to need.
Mario, if you could maybe give us a minute. I see Rachel has entered the Zoom call, so that means we're running up against time. But can you give us what you can do with Catholic Charities?
Yeah, you bet. And I'll be brief. So, everything Rudy, Marisa, that has been said, I think is absolutely appropriate. And I think the point really is that doing the work is sort of doing the work of local change and local transformation. For those of you who are in the New York area, we need you. So we've got a lot of stuff that you can do. And that's true for whether you're in high school, college, graduate school, or retiree. Just to give you a sampling of what we do with immigrants, we run monthly clinics in all parts of New York City and the lower Hudson Valley, where we meet 100 people in a day. We need volunteers who can translate, volunteers who can do screening of asylum. We run some programs in the immigration courts. Likewise, we need volunteers, lawyers, non-lawyers. We have a pro bono platform for those of you who are lawyers, or what we call actually immigration advocates, because sometimes non-lawyers can also do that work. There you get matched with a case, and we mentor you and we supervise you and we guide you through that. We have opportunities for those who want to volunteer and teach ESL or do one-on-one conversation partnerships with people who are struggling to learn and adjust. Our refugee resettlement department has these wonderful opportunities where you bring your skill and your knowledge and you help people draft a resume and then do a mock interview.
Perfect.
And it's as simple as,
Right.
It's okay to look someone in the eye, and it's okay to shake their hand at the end of an interview. And you should not wear a hat, although, right, maybe you do wear a bit. So it's all these things that are so helpful and that all of us can do. And you bring your talents and your experience and your life empathy.
Great advice. Awesome. I also want to mention that on the event page, there is a link to donate to the Julian Zamora. Professor Julian Zamora was a professor at Notre Dame. It looks like for over 25 years, very involved in the Latin community at Notre Dame and throughout the area. And they now have a scholarship in his name at the school, so you can donate to that as well. I think, Rachel, you're probably going to talk a little bit about the other things that are on the event page in terms of donation. So turning it over to you, Rachel.
So first off, I want to thank our esteemed panelists and our wonderful moderator for taking the time to lend your expertise and your experiences to help all of us learn a little more about what's going on at the border. I know I definitely learned a lot tonight. And so what Juliet was mentioning about all the resources in the description box below of this YouTube live stream, there's a link to all the different resources mentioned on tonight's panel. And so if you want to volunteer, if you want to give either your time or your donations, all of that information is below. And again, I would like to thank everyone so much for joining us this evening. And we hope to see you in our next event on our Beyond the Comfort Zone series. So I hope everyone has a great evening and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.